Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we have with us Rev.Tim Buckley from the parish of Widcombe in Bath City from the Church of England, and he's with us. And before we chat with him on Coffee Chats, I'd like you to see this introductory video of his ministry. Okay.
Hi there and welcome to Widcombe and welcome to our new website. My name's Tim Buckley and I'm the Vicar of Widcombe Benefice, which is a fabulous parish very close to the city centre of Bath and incorporates two amazing churches. St Thomas of Becket, a fabulous medieval church built sometime around the 1490s, is a small church but one full of life, beauty and stillness. It's traditional in worship but open in its outlook with a strong richness of liturgy and worship. It has a fabulous, faithful and deeply welcoming community, and so is an incredible place that offers a quiet, safe environment to explore faith and encounter God. St Matt's, on the other hand, is a relaxed and contemporary in style with an emphasis on dynamic band-led praise and worship. It's a church that will define itself as word and spirit, a church keen to embrace and form community and be accessible to and connect with the unchurched. It's a place of joy, music, vibrancy and all ages. It's a real privilege to be part of this Anglican parish with two such different churches, but with one united family that really loves each other and loves this community. It's so exciting to see what God's doing here amongst us, and maybe you'd like to come and play your part in that too. So whether you're a visitor or already part of the church family, we hope you'll find everything that you need on this new website. Please do get in touch with us if you'd like to connect better with us or you have any questions. We'd love to help you explore more of what God has for you. So do come along and see what God is doing here in this parish. Two great churches, one amazing family.
So Tim, welcome to Coffee Chats.
Thank you.
It's good to have you.
It's good to be here.
Just want to ask you a few questions. Now, since we have known you for some time now, during your visits to Sri Lanka and your love for people and, to see them saved. Just want to ask you, what made you become a vicar?
What made me become a vicar? It was a surprise to everyone, especially my friends, and a great surprise to me. I had no intention of becoming a vicar. I've always had a passion for the church at large. And I grew up going to all sorts of different kind of churches. As I grew up, my parents were in a Baptist church that was quite traditional where I grew up as a child. They were very involved there, helping the young people, and I was always involved around church. But then with my father's work, we moved, and I went to United Reformed Church and a really traditional rural Anglican church, really quiet, had a tiny amount of people, and they had traditional liturgy, which I wasn't used to, so kind of reading from a book and singing parts and standing up and sitting down. I was always standing in the wrong bit and sitting in the wrong bit, didn't have a clue what was going on, and there was the vicar in all his long dress, and I was kind of... And it wasn't necessarily my style of worship, and yet there was something there that I thought was beautiful in all those different kind of churches. And then at the age of 17 I became a Christian and joined a really charismatic church full of young people, band-led worship, and I loved it. It was great. And that then became, I went to university, I studied law, and all the way through that time I probably knew I didn't want to go into law. I wanted to kind of serve God in some way, and I felt that calling to serve God. So I ended up working for a kind of independent church, a free church, and we church planted, and that was my heart. So I imagined I would end up in that sort of church all the rest of my life, and I was very much part of that church and got married and settled there, and then suddenly, dramatically really, in 2005, I felt God spoke to me and called me out of the job. I was working in the city of Bristol, working across lots of churches, working with young people, students, going into schools, helping with worship. Keen worship leader. And then God called me into the Church of England, and I thought the Church of England was finished. I thought it was done. So it was a real shock to discover, actually, no, the Church of England was beginning to grow in some parts, and the church that I started working for was really exciting. It was full of young people. It had kind of fairly modern worship and some great people, and I sensed that pull back into the established church, probably as a different kind of vicar. but to kind of breathe life. I think God is constantly wanting to breathe life back into the dry bones, and he loves his bride, whatever shape and type and flavour. I think he just loves his church, and God's not finished with the Church of England, and I've discovered that actually there's some incredible growth, and in England there's real renewal and growth and pioneering and church planting and a whole generation of new young leaders, which is really exciting. I used to be one of those young leaders. I'm probably not quite as young as I used to be, funnily enough. But I see these new young leaders coming through, and I love working with them and encouraging them. And so I'm excited for the future of the Church of England. So here I am, a vicar. I still laugh when I get a post addressed to Rev.Tim Buckley. It just still makes me laugh because it seems so unlikely. But I love it, and I know exactly where God's called me to be.
Amen. Also, I find that you're a very humorous guy, and you love to joke and laugh,
and good looking.
Good looking.
You forgot that.
Yeah.
Good looking.
So, what is the message you would like to give the church in general? When it comes to things like being a part of the mainline church.
I love the church at large. I love all types of church. I've experienced different types of church, and I think we can learn from one another. So, when I went to the Baptist church that I grew up in, they have a real love for the Word, and just a kind of the Word is central to all they do and the way they think and the way they act as church. And that's got to be a great thing. We need to be people of the Word.
Okay.
I love the kind of charismatic churches that I've been part of, where they're just passionate about worship and kind of the breath of God, the Spirit of God, and encountering the reality of the presence of God.
Okay.
And so I think we can learn from those sort of churches. I've been part of churches where they're really big on being family and community. We can learn from those kind of churches. I've been part of churches that are really passionate about the poor and social action and social justice and being out involved in the world and acting. And I think that's really important too.
Okay.
So I guess my heart is that all of those parts of the church, we can learn from those. But above all, I think the church is supposed to be a place of life.
Okay.
Jesus said, I came to give life and life to the full. And if we're his bride should be a place of life.
Okay.
I think we should be really good at weeping with those who mourn and loving them. But I also think there should be lots of laughter in the church. I think the church is supposed to be a place of fun.
Okay.
I have a family, I have 3 kids, and there are times when, rightly, we need to be serious. But there's times when we laugh lots. And I laugh with them, and they laugh at me, Dad, a lot. They laugh at me, not with me always, they laugh at me. But we laugh together because family is supposed to be a place of fun. And I think sometimes as church, we've lost what it is to know joy. And I think when Jesus was with his disciples, they learned and they kind of walked together, but I suspect that they laughed a lot. And that for me is a really important thing, so that I don't take myself too seriously as well. I take God really seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. I'm very glad that God cares about us and uses us, but laughter I think is important, and joy, not manufactured, but the joy of the Lord. It's supposed to be something that lifts us and helps us, so it's good to laugh.
Yes.
You made me laugh lots.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So also, Tim, now can you tell us a little bit about your ministry? And you have planted a church, right?
Sure.
In Widcombe, and so maybe you can tell us a bit about how you went on that journey.
So I guess you might have seen from the video, I think, so maybe you're going to show which kind of is for newcomers in our parish. I had 2 churches. One's very traditional, very old, 700 years old. On that site for 1,000 years, there's been worship and prayer and people getting married. And so there's kind of it's quite a sacred place. It's a really small, beautiful little church, very faithful, traditional congregation. And there I suppose I look like a proper vicar. I have my collar, for some services I kind of have robes, and people believe then finally that I'm a vicar. But the other church I have, St. Matt's, was a big, vast Victorian building.
St. Matt's means St. Matthew's.
St. Matthew's,
St. Matthew's
and everyone calls it St. Matt's, which probably gives a little. So the other church is St. Thomas of Becket, named after the saint who was martyred, St. Matthew's. St. Matt's, everyone in Widcombe calls it St. Matt's, that's the name we give it, which probably gives a flavour of the type of church we are.
Okay.
And I guess it's fair to say it was a church that, like many churches in England, kind of closed down in the 60s and 70s, became redundant. People stopped worshipping there. And so they turned it into just a hall that they rented occasionally. It's a vast building. It's the biggest worship space in the city, church space in the city after the Abbey. It was designed for over 1,200 people. But I kind of, when I saw that it was empty, and I felt like a few years back, just me and a few others wanted to plant a congregation into that church, just to worship and use that space. And I sensed that God was wanting to birth a new expression of church there. So we planted a congregation. It's just really grown, and it's a real place of joy, and worship for us is really central there. And I took a small team and we began to pray in there and worship in there regularly. And we now have a Sunday night meeting. We have lots of students, lots of young families who are beginning to join us, and older sort of spiritual mums and dads who can help that younger generation who are exploring faith and finding faith for the first time. We have a lot of fun. Okay. And we're learning to be community, to not do church, but to be church, which I think is the call for all of us. What does it mean to be church, to be the body of Christ?
Can you explain that a bit to our
Sure. I guess, I've been around church all my life.
Yeah, because let me tell you, because sometimes people get the wrong idea that, we are trying to build a sort of a ministry about yourself and things like that. So
it's great, and I understand that the pressure and the temptation to do that, and often it's other people. I suppose, if I'm honest, I have no desire for a platform. I don't want to build a platform for myself or my ministry or even my church name. I'm not interested in any of that. All I long for, I want to build an altar, which is worshipped, and to build a place that people can come and encounter Him. And we want to build a family. I believe that when you look back at Genesis, when you look back at the Bible, God didn't set up an institution. He established family. Okay. Adam and Eve were told to go forth and reproduce, to multiply after themselves, to produce family and to be family. And I don't think it's changed. I think it's that same mandate to us to create family. God says He sets the lonely in family. And I think church at its best can be a place that embraces the least, the last and the lost, and it reaches out to them. Church shouldn't just be a place that people come, but actually be a place where we're equipped to go. I think, that word apostle means sent ones, and my passion for us as a church, whether it's in the traditional form of St. Thomas of Becket, or whether it's in the kind of dynamism and kind of passion of St. Matt's, is that all of those guys, whatever their sphere of influence, that they feel equipped to go, to be light, to be love, to offer grace and mercy, to show the reality of the kingdom of God in those places, whether they're their mums on the school gates, or teachers, or plumbers, or doctors, or students, but wherever they are, they can bring the light of Jesus just by who they are and what's inside them. And church is a place that we can celebrate their gifts and see their gifts growing and released and encouraged, and we come together to celebrate. And also it's a place where we come together to mourn when things are tough. We need to be really real about the reality of life, and church should be a place that embraces those who are struggling and gives them support and nurture and love. And so all of those are part of being church rather than doing church. I think so often, sadly, church is about running a service or putting on an event. And of course, that's a part of what it means to be church. But fundamentally, you need to be church first before you try and do things. So it's about growing that. And being a community of love is the phrase I talk about. In fact, often in Bath, I almost don't even use the word church because it carries so much baggage for so many people who don't want an institution. They want reality. So we talk about family, community, and the ecclesia, the people of God is about people rather than buildings or ministries or reputation. The only reputation I want is one that's good with God, and He looks and He's pleased with what we're doing because we're seeking Him.
Also, Tim, you are a very good worship leader, right? And I think you lead, even though you're the vicar of the church, you lead worship in your own services, and you love to teach about worship. So can you tell us a bit about worship, and what is it that really strikes a chord in your heart, to bring worship to the King?
Well, the reality is, I'm not a brilliant musician. I can play guitar, and I love the guitar, but I think worship is more than about being brilliant. I can lead worship, and I love leading worship. And in fact, I'm trying to do myself more out of it. I want to encourage other worship leaders, and I'm really blessed that in our church we've got young leaders coming through and other musicians. I see my job really as kind of vicar, as leader and pastor and teacher in the church there, is to do myself out of a job, to raise up new pastors, to raise up new evangelists, to raise up the prophets and the teachers and the kind of the servants and the worship leaders. But they wheel me out as worship. They want me to lead worship every now and then, and I love worship. It's not that I love leading worship, I just love worship. Because when I worship and when we worship, we connect with the King. And there's something about our hearts soften. I think worship is a journey. You know what it is. Sometimes you come to church, you're really tired, and there's a million things you've got to do. And then the worship starts, and you think, and then something starts to happen, and you begin to go on a bit of a journey. You think, that's who God is. I can be really grateful. And even though these things are tough in my life, God is good. And so as we begin to worship, and it doesn't have to be in song, it can be in stillness, it can be in different forms of worship, we connect with him, we connect with our King, and our hearts begin to change, and we come into his throne room. And when we meet him face to face, as I believe we can in worship, if we really press in, then we're changed. We're never the same again. It's like Moses going up the mountain. We take on his presence, his glow, and then when we go into the world as people who are worshippers, this people see. And I think so worship changes us, and it's when you've tasted the presence of God, you become hungry for more. And so worship doesn't stop when we leave church. I talk about having a life filled with worship, whether it's in our work or in our play or when we're walking about. We need to have sort of worship in our hearts, and worship is just a joy. It's a joy to encounter the King, to focus on Jesus for all he's done for us, to experience his presence by the Holy Spirit, and to sense the love of the Father that is poured out to us. And he draws us, he calls us, even when we don't feel worthy. He draws us in to the throne of grace. And I think that's a really important message to what I would say is an orphan generation who feel like the prodigal sons. They're away, they're full of shame, they kind of don't know what they're doing with their lives, they feel empty. But there's a Father longing for them and looking for them, always got his eyes on the horizon, always scanning for when the sons and daughters are going to return home. And when they do return home, he doesn't kind of say, well, you've taken a long time. Where have you been? Why have you been with the pigs? I told you you'd come back. No, he says he runs to them, and he runs and he embraces them, and he puts a cloak around their shoulders and a ring on their finger. That's the Father in heaven I know, and that's the Father in heaven we're called to encounter and to lead others into worship. And when we approach him, perhaps full of shame, perhaps full of regret, perhaps full of lack of confidence, the running Father comes to us. And for me, that's what worship is, an embrace with the Father's love.
Yeah, given your position in these two churches that you mentioned, one is very traditional and the other is full of young people who love. How do you juggle this, and how do you manage? Because the young people are used to a different kind of music, different band, and then the traditional type of churches who stay. And sometimes, one doesn't like the other.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the problems we can have in churches is that we tolerate one another. And I think tolerating stuff is a problem. We're not to tolerate one another. We're told to love one another. And love goes beyond saying, I need to be like you. Actually, I'm not a gardener. But I'm blessed to have a garden at home, and my wife's a great gardener, and I've got friends who are great gardeners. One of the joys of the garden is that it's full of different kind of plants, and I look out on the garden at home in England. In Sri Lanka, it's pretty dry out here. In England, we've had lots of rain. We have plants, all different colours and expressions. And I would never say, that plant's, I only want a garden with daffodils in it. I only want a garden with tulips in. Variety is beautiful. And somehow in the mystery of God's kingdom and his creation, I think in the church, variety is a beautiful thing. So when I became vicar in Widcombe and I took on this very traditional church, they had an 8 a.m. spoken BCP service. That's a very traditional English service. Goes back, long time. Old English, very traditional, no hymns, very quiet. And it's at 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Before I became a vicar, I didn't know 8 a.m. existed on a Sunday morning, let alone getting up and doing a service. And I kind of thought, 8 a.m.? I'm not good in the mornings, but I knew that God was coming. So I went and did this 8 a.m. service, and the first time I turned up there in my collar and my robes, and this beautiful elderly congregation, people in their 90s, literally, few little people there. It was stunning. And I felt God's presence there, and I thought, that's surprising. I didn't think he would be up and about at a service like this on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. But he was there, and I felt his love for these people, and I watched them, even with traditional liturgy and these familiar words, the rhythm of the words, encountering God. And it made me think, who am I to judge how we must worship? We can worship in all sorts of different ways. You know what? You can have the kind of most vibrant band-led worship and great musicians and great noise and all the flashing lights, and you can have it all, and the smoke machines, and it can look stunning, and it can be completely empty. It can be just as religious as any other form. Because religious worship is not about, it's about the form. Rather than the heart, and true worship is always about the heart. The Father said to that woman, the Samaritan woman, the Father's looking for worshippers who worship in spirit and in truth. it's about the truth, the integrity. And so whether it's in stillness and whether it's in traditional forms of worship or whether it's with a brilliant band, it's about truth. And if we encounter the Father in those ways, then it's good. So for me, my thing is to teach people to honour different traditions. So for the guys at St Thomas of Becket, they know there are these young people and it's kind of music, and a lot of them say, oh, it's not my kind of music, but they're finding God, and that's amazing. So I tell them to pray for these guys, and they do. They pray for it, and they love it. And these guys at St Thomas of Becket, these younger guys, I often say to them, I know you don't like what you see as kind of maybe traditional, boring forms of worship, but actually these guys are real mothers and fathers in the faith, and they're praying for you. Honour them, love them. And some of them have started coming to those traditional services and joining with the older generations, and I think there's nothing more glorious than the younger and older generations joining together and being church rather than doing church. Okay. And so there's a culture of honour, and what I say to them is, and what they have really now, I think, feel is, we might be different church congregations, but we're one family. And that's the key. We're one family. I met an American about a year ago in Bath, and she was talking to me. It was probably 2 years ago now, and she was talking to me about the city. She said, there's churches everywhere in Bath. There's church everywhere I look. There's churches, there's spires, and there's new churches and old churches, and there's kind of little churches, and there's enormous churches, and there's charismatic churches, and there's kind of real traditional conservative churches, and there's just hundreds of churches. And she asked me, she said, have you ever counted how many churches there are in this city? And it got me thinking, because I'm aware I connect with lots of the different church leaders from different traditions, and I think that's really important. And so one weekend I walked around the city, and I walked around the city and the streets, and I looked at all these different churches, and I kind of was trying to pray for them as I was going. And I counted how many different churches there are in our city. And I was amazed, I was staggered. Do you know how many churches there were in the city of Buckley? It's only a small city, 90,000 people.
Yes.
I don't know if you guess, people might... 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100. It's incredible in our city. One church. One church. One church. I believe that passionately with all my heart. There's one church in our city. And we're all parts of it. And I must never say, I've got it sorted. I know how to do church. Because over there's another expression of the body. Maybe it's flying, maybe it's thriving. And my prayer is, we'll let them thrive even more. Okay. Because if they're thriving, God's being glorified. And maybe we can learn from them. Maybe we can help them. Maybe they can help us. And when a church is struggling, I don't want to go, oh, that's good. They're going to struggle, so I'll get more people. I think, no, I want to pray for them, because they're part of my body. They're part of my family. And I think if we start seeing church not as competition, but as family, then our heart gets moved towards them, and we look to work together. And that's not always easy, but I think the heart of God is for us to be family together and to work together. And that's my longing, and that's my desire. And we're beginning to see that in Bath, very much so.
That's nice. So what would be your message to the churches in Sri Lanka, or the current, or maybe the current generation of churches?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have any answers, but I guess my prayer would be that the churches in Sri Lanka would rediscover the joy and the privilege of praying. I think we need to pray more. Sometimes we need to do less and pray more. We need to pray first before we do the doing. Sometimes we feel like I better look busy in case anyone's looking. For pastors, that's a real problem. Someone's looking my way, I'll look really busy. And I get why we do that. Often we feel that we should look busy and be about the Lord's work. But actually, I look at Jesus, and when he was really pressed, and when there was lots of demands on him, he just went up a mountain on his own and prayed often. I'm not sure we're always great at doing that. So I think we need to pray, and the church at large needs to learn how to pray. I think Jesus taught his disciples. They realised that he prayed a lot, and they knew they needed to learn how to. And by praying, I don't mean sort of religious praying. I mean just really heartfelt prayers. We need to learn to reconnect with the Lord in prayer and actually share our hearts and our longings, our desires, to honour him, to have a conversation with him, and to hear from heaven his plans and his strategies for our community, because the world's in a dark place, and I think the darkness is getting darker and the light is supposed to get brighter in it. And so we need to hear strategy from heaven. I think we need to learn to love one another, not just tolerate, but actually love. And love costs something. And I think by praying for one another, love begins to flow. And I think, I think we've got to rediscover what it means to worship and truly yield our hearts to God, so that his purpose and his will is done. You know, that's my constant prayer. Lord, let your kingdom come, let your will be done. Not my will. I'm not interested in any kingdom for myself. I don't want to build a kingdom for me or my people, or actually it's your kingdom come. I don't want a platform, just an altar where Jesus is worshipped. And so I suppose in worship, I talk about this to worship leaders particularly. I love when John the Baptist is talking and he says, may I decrease, that you increase. Yeah. And I think that if we can become more and more invisible so that people see Jesus in us and through us, and we become a community of love, by all this men will know you're my disciples, if you love one another. So that's my prayer, that's my longing for a growing sense of unity, and unity that isn't structural, but unity that's heartfelt. And that means it's coming to great places like this amazing coffee shop, the best coffee shop in Sri Lanka, possibly the best coffee shop in the world.
Thank you.
And doing this, talking over coffee, and building friendship and building relationship. Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. That must be really important. Jesus calls us friends. He called those he was with friends. So we need to discover the joy of friendship as the body, because then the world will look at us and go, what is it these people have? Well, we've got the love of God. By this all men will know you're my disciples if you love one another. So that's a challenge. I need to love more. I need to decrease that he might increase.
Amen. All right. So thank you very much, Tim. It was a wonderful time.
Thank you, and thank you for the coffee. And I'll be back.
And yes, and we look forward to seeing you more often.
I hope so. God willing, we will be back. It's just a beautiful country.
Thank you for what you're investing in this nation as well, coming here. And
I come here and I go home all the richer, genuinely. I feel like I learn from you guys. I experience God's grace here, and it's a privilege. And that's not the kind of thing you just say as a visiting. It's a privilege, and I go home always all the more richer for it. So bless you, Sri Lanka.
Okay, so thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again in many more of our coffee chats. And hope you had a good time listening to Rev.Tim Buckley this evening.